I'm Jenna Miscavige. I was born and raised in Scientology. I left when I was 21 years old and wrote a book about it. My uncle, David Miscavige, is the leader of Scientology, and this is my YouTube channel. Hey you guys, back today with another question. I thought this one was really interesting, so let's get right into it. This is from Vega SO9NY. And she asks, hi, how could you write a book without proper education, according to your experience not having higher education? All right, so just a little bit of information on this. I grew up in Scientology's most dedicated group called the Sea Org, where you sign 1 billion year contracts dedicating yourself lifetime after lifetime of servitude to Scientology. You wear military style uniforms, you live communally, you eat communally, you have ranks in this organization, you get little to no time off, and you forgo the right to have children. And you're sort of isolated from the rest of the world. Like I didn't have TV, internet, or anything like that. And I grew up in a boarding school because my parents were part of this organization, which I later became a part of. But the boarding school, when I was sort of training to be a member of this organization, we did not live with our parents and we did not get a standard education. For the first half of the day, we were doing sort of heavy manual labor. And then after lunch, up until 9:30 at night is when we would do studies. But at least half of that time was spent on Scientology studies. And the educational part of our studies was not what you would usually see in a school. So basically we had no grades, and kids from ages 6 years old to 16 years old would all be in the same classroom. There was not one subject that was taught by a teacher. We all had what was called check sheets, which was basically a list of things we had to study. For instance, it would be like, read this book. Okay, now write an essay about this. Okay, now demonstrate your understanding of this. And we would write our name on it and we would check off each step as we did it. And so it was very self-led. And if we needed help, we really weren't allowed to ask for it. In Scientology, they believe that if you're studying something and you don't understand it and you need help with it, it's because there is a word in the thing that you're studying that you don't understand. Now, at face value, this is actually a true statement. However, when you're a young kid just learning how to read and learning very basic things, and if you ask your teacher, which we call the course supervisor, if you ask them for help, it was basically a situation where they were not allowed to help you. They would say, look at your materials and find which word you don't understand and look it up in a dictionary. So this type of thing might work for an adult in training or even like later ages of schooling. But if you're a little kid, it's like you kind of don't feel like you have anyone you can go to. You can look up a word in the dictionary, you can get another word you don't understand, and then another one and another one. And sometimes there's concepts that are too difficult to understand as a kid without somebody just explaining it to you. In addition to this, pretty much the main concentration in our schooling type studies was on reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so we weren't taught things like science, chemistry, physics, geography, history, art, biology, anatomy. I might have said that twice. And I've spoken a lot about this in my book and here on my YouTube channel. So that's the basis for this question. I kind of already gave the answer to this question, didn't I? Our main focus in Scientology was on reading and writing and arithmetic. And so I would argue that many people who grew up in Scientology actually are kind of hyperliterate. Now, this isn't necessarily true for everyone, but I know I, for one, knew how to read by the time I was 4 and I was already writing because that's very much what everything was concentrated on. Now, when I was really young, being told just to look up words in the dictionary was difficult. But as I got older, the truth is that I learned a lot of words and I learned a lot about the English language. And sometimes those word chains lead to you having to study things that maybe you weren't taught in school. So I'm not sure if this question is kind of condescending. Sometimes people ask perfectly innocent questions and there'll be people in the comments who are kind of like, I don't think they meant it in a rude way. And in general, I don't really think anybody means things in a rude way, but I don't know if it's because recently I've had this troll on the internet basically saying she didn't write her book. And so the answer to this question is I do know how to read. I do know how to write quite well, if I do say so myself. I would actually say that it is probably true that in Scientology, we got more practice on the reading and writing aspect of things than most people do in regular education, because of the fact that we had to look up so many words, because in so many cases, I was required to read aloud perfectly. We were required to look up etymologies of words. We were required to use the definitions of words in sentences. So it was all very word driven and sort of communication driven. And so I would say, if anything, that would be our strong suit, having grown up there. Now, in addition to this, when I was writing my book, it was on a really fast timeline where it had to be done within 6 months. And this was because the publisher was worried that Scientology would get wind of it and try to do things to stop it. And so it just had to be done quickly. And so when you're writing a story, how it works is you first do the rough first draft. And then from there you edit. But you need to get all of the things out of your head. It's known as the shitty first draft. Everyone who is a writer has heard of this. And for the most part, that was my job on my book. So I did actually write with a wonderful writer and an editor who worked at the publishing company. But the truth is that no writer would be able to write about my experience with all of the in-depth, complex language of Scientology. She would have no way of knowing my story if I didn't do the vast majority of the writing. I'd also been writing this book for years before this process even started. I'd been writing since I left Scientology. So between me having already written so much, between me having told my story on different forums, and between my beautiful co-author being able to have the point of view of somebody who was never in Scientology, and the editor at my publisher who was just amazing, he would ask such good questions that I could then go out of my way and write about. And then I could work with my co-author, Lisa, to say it in the best way, or to where she would have to pull out thoughts and feelings from me. And we were just honestly a great team. And I'm really, really proud of how it turned out. So while we were very much deprived of a standard education and there were no high school diplomas or college degrees, I will say that sometimes having a diploma and a degree or certificates says more about the opportunities you've been given than your actual intelligence. Now, also, people can have certifications and degrees who are also very, very intelligent. And I'm sure this is the case more often than not. But what I'm saying is that because somebody doesn't have those degrees or that education, it's not necessarily because they're stupid. It's, in my case, it's just because I wasn't given that opportunity. Okay, so the next question is from Stasia Flonase, and she says, since leaving Scientology, have you gotten any further education? I really like this question. So the answer is, I didn't go and get a high school diploma, because the truth is that the second I walked out of Scientology, I had to go straight to working and paying for the apartment I was living in, and it was tough. It's also tough to do that without a degree. It's hard to get a high-paying job. And so I was already basically 22. I had had a kid by the time I was 25, and really just going and sitting for hours and getting all those credits really just wasn't an option for me. That being said as well, I had spent the vast majority of my life not able to have a day off, not able to have a vacation. And so the idea of kind of sitting there studying every day after hours, all of the subjects I'd missed in school, wasn't really a way that I wanted to spend my time. I needed to relax. I needed to decompress. I was busy rethinking everything I had been taught about Scientology. There were so many things going on. I was being followed by Scientology. There were internal family dynamics. They were trying to basically infiltrate our family in order to get my ex-husband's parents to stop talking to us. So there was just so much going on emotionally. I just didn't have the luxury of doing that, or honestly, the resources at that time. This is one of the reasons why we've set up the SBTV Foundation, to help people who are leaving or who have left Scientology to get back on their feet in the real world. Because often when people leave, they don't have family, they don't have credit, They don't know how to drive. I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have a bank account. And so you're sort of concentrating on those things when you first leave. And so we created this foundation to help people when they first leave so that they have access to the opportunities that they were denied. This is one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about the foundation. But to answer the question a little bit more, I did do education in other ways. For example, I did go through massage class when I was living in Virginia for 3 years. I would go to massage class in evenings. I would travel an hour away after working a full-time job and having my son be at home with me all day. The interesting thing about massage class is that you actually learn things like physiology and anatomy, which I had never really learned before. I didn't really know much about the circulatory system, the skeletal system, the digestive system. There were so many things that I had never been taught in school. Even at that point, when I had had my son, I couldn't even have told you necessarily before taking this class what exactly was the difference between my uterus, my cervix, and so on. And so taking massage class wasn't just about learning massage. It was actually learning all about myself and my own body. And it cost a lot of money and it took a lot of time, but it was incredibly enlightening to me and empowering. It was actually one of the first things that sort of set me on fire as far as my own curiosity. I also learned a lot about herbology in that class, and to some degree, even though on the surface it's a massage class, in herbology you learn a lot about chemistry, and massage you learn a lot about anatomy and physiology. When I moved back to San Diego, I took a creative writing program at UCSD, and it was just so wonderful and interesting. As you all know, I've taken a million cooking classes. And I know this seems like disrelated, but the truth is that cooking is chemistry, baking is chemistry. And I don't just mean in the way that you add baking soda. It's like, no, there's actually a chemical process going on. There's the gluten, which stretches, and the yeast or the leavener is making little air bubbles. So I'm not saying this teaches you every little thing about chemistry. But what I will say is that many people who have studied chemistry in school are being taught it in a way where it is a big data dump on them, information dump on them as a kid, when they have no way of necessarily relating it to something in the real world. And so my point is that when you learn something, there is a little bit of a benefit to learning something as an adult. When you're curious about it, when you're not being forced to learn about it, and when you have real life, real world experience that you are able to relate it to immediately, it helps you to solidify this information in your mind. It helps you to attach it to other underlying principles and foundational things that you know, so that the information is stored in a way where you'll never forget it. By the way, there's this really great fiction book that I read recently called Lessons in Chemistry. It was so smart and charming. I loved it so much. I'll put a link to it in the description. I think you guys would love it. Now, I also know that this is sort of like an offbeat way of learning something, but I took this scholarship program with Floret Flowers. They actually gifted me a scholarship, which was amazing. It was one of the first things I've been gifted in my life. And it's actually a really sweet story. My neighbor, Teresa, a wonderful person, so kind and so giving, applied to this scholarship for me and got it for me and told me as a surprise. And basically, it was where I learned all about flower farming, where you learn things about like fertilizer, watering. You have to calculate how you space your plants, and based on the germination rate of the seeds, how much money you're going to make per flower bed, how you can make your business profitable. So essentially, this course and the many things that I spent so many hours researching for my flower business is you're learning about biology, you're learning about chemistry, you're learning about math, and you're learning about business, and you're learning about the economics of business. Now, you're not getting a whole class on this like you are in regular schooling, but I would argue that in almost every job that I've had, when I've worked with people who had a regular basic high school diploma and even degrees, I have personally found it to be true that in cases of math, like for example, I worked at a healthy dog food company, and we would have to calculate serving amounts for different weights of dogs, and there was a certain ratio and things like that. There were people who were highly educated who could not compute this basic arithmetic. Now, I never learned about algebra or trigonometry or calculus in school, but I did learn basic math. And the truth is that I don't really believe that I've ever missed not learning calculus or trigonometry. Now, if I wanted to be an engineer, that would be the case. But my basic math skills that I know that I've practiced since I've been an adult, I have found that my understanding of it and my application of it is often better than my peers. The same goes for baking. In addition to chemistry being involved in that, there's also a lot of math involved in that, especially when you have a cottage bakery. Also, in the past 5 years, I did learn to code. I did not have the time or opportunity to go to a college and learn this, but I studied it on my own time on evenings and weekends. And I used platforms like Zero to Mastery and Code Academy and got certificates from them. And in the end, coding is really just basic logic. And there's a bit of learning another language involved because coding has several languages and you have to learn the nuances of that. But how good you are at coding is not determined by how much you study coding. It is determined by your ability to problem solve and use logic. And while those are things that can be taught in school, more often than not, those things are determined by your intelligence in that arena. Now, I'm a big believer that what is generally considered intelligent, good at math, good at problem solving, those things is actually a certain kind of intelligence. I believe that some people aren't less intelligent, like just say the stereotype of the athlete who is horrible at school. That athlete has their own type of intelligence. It's a physical type of intelligence. They know that if they hit the ball in this specific way, it's something they know innately in their body with muscle memory. It's an intelligence that they have that other people don't have. Or just for instance, some people have a greater intelligence with plants and landscaping and gardening, or people have more of an intelligence in hospitality because they understand what other people need. They understand intellectually and innately what other people need to feel comfortable and taken care of. That is its own intelligence. And one intelligence isn't necessarily greater than the other. One may be rewarded more than the other, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is actually smarter. It's just they might be smarter in an area, they might be more intelligent in an area that leads to more monetary gain. The truth is that over the years, I have taken so many classes and so many things. I'm kind of obsessed. I kind of have a problem. Like, I've been subscribed to Masterclass forever, and I think that I am Skillshare's greatest customer. I think that I'm probably their first customer. I take everything from cooking classes to classes on how to organize your house to how to use certain programs for absolutely everything. I've also taken a lot of design classes where I learn color theory, composition, and just have little certifications from the most random things. I've also taken piano classes and I've studied music, which many people may not know is really just basic math. So I very much think that curiosity equals intelligence. Knowing that you don't know things and having a drive to learn them, I think if you have that, you can learn anything. But unfortunately, if you are not given the same opportunities that other people are given, it does set you back a lot. And I think I've done a pretty good job staying curious. And it hasn't been a hard job because basically I can't stop being curious. It's a problem. Oh, side note, it's amazing how much knowledge you can acquire from simply being a hypochondriac. Or how much you can learn through trying to lose weight, and how much math you practice from simple calorie counting, and how much really biology and chemistry and anatomy and physiology you learn from doing really deep dives into these subjects. I don't necessarily have or necessarily need a degree in these things in order to live the life that I want to live. Although I will admit that I do want my kids to go to college just so that they have every opportunity they can possibly have, even if it's somebody who's just reads a resume and they just throw away the people who don't have a degree. I want my kids to have all the opportunity in the world. I want them to have the best chance of having everything they want and being successful. But I have to look at my situation in the most positive way I can because I have to live with myself. I have to live with my situation. And honestly, I'm proud of all the things I've learned. Another great way to learn a lot about cultures and geography is to travel the world. And that was something that was a really big priority for me and my ex-husband, and we would take our kids everywhere with us. And through that, you learn a lot about psychology and belief systems and things like that. Also, if you leave a cult where it's all mind games and manipulation and power dynamics, I'm going to be real, you learn a fuckload about psychology. And I have a friend who is beautiful and smart, and she went to Stanford, and she's a doctor of psychology. She specialized in cult studies, and she wrote her whole thesis about it. And I will tell you right now, there is no level of studies that can give you the understanding and in-depth knowledge that you get from having experienced it your entire life. All right, well, that was a really long answer to a couple of short questions. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of my new members. Thank you so much for signing up. It means the world to me to have your support. And if you have other questions you want me to answer, please put them in the comments. Thank you so much, you guys, for being here, and I will see you again soon. Bye.